Hello everyone, my name is Ivan Castro, and I'm gonna tell you the last progress of my thesis, aeroelastic analysis of kites applied to airborne wind energy systems under the supervision of Professor Sánchez Arriaga and Professor Cavallaro. So first, I would like to tell you a little bit about the concept of airborne wind energy systems. I know some of you are familiar with it, but for those that not, I can tell you some important concepts. So basically, this is a novel technique to harvest energy from the wind, normally high altitude winds, because up there, the winds are stronger and less intermittent, and this is important for wind power. And also this technology presents other advantages with respect to conventional wind turbines, such as low cost and portable infrastructures. So basically we are changing the costly tower of a wind turbine by a tether, and then we can reach higher, and we can also have less cost in the end. So among the different concepts of airborne wind energy systems, we can find, in general, two types. Ground gen, in which we harvest the energy by making a figure of 8 or a circular pattern, basically to increase the traction of the tether, and then we pull the tether, and the tether moves a generator on the ground. So this kind of AWE systems have two phases: the traction phase, where we generate the electricity, and the retraction phase, where we have to spend some energy that has been generated, but in net, so the total energy should be positive. On the other hand, the flygen systems basically use drones with onboard turbines. They also fly these crosswind trajectories to harvest energy directly from the turbines and then send it back through the tether to the ground. So I'm going to tell you a little bit the general objectives of the AWE group at UC3M, and also I will be specific to the objectives of my thesis. So at UC3M we do simulations on the one hand, and we have dynamics and control tools such as the Lagrangian kite simulator, which is open source, and we also do aerodynamics and elasticity, so we have tools for both. And we also do experiments. We have built an estimator which is an experimental setup with a lot of sensors that are fused, for example, in an extended Kalman filter. And we also have a ground-based control system, basically to automate the figures of 8 of the kite and so on. So the general objective of the experiments is to create a small-scale AWE machine, and Paco will tell you more about that. But coming back to my thesis, which is on aerodynamics, from the experiments we can get an experimental aerodynamic model. From the simulations we can get a theoretical aerodynamic model. And then we make a comparison to get a validated aerodynamic model to be coupled with a flight simulator and to get high-fidelity flight simulations. Basically, this is the general purpose. So the objective of my thesis, in one sentence, is improving the aerodynamic models by using experiments and by using simulations, basically to understand the aerodynamics of delta kites and to be able to couple it to dynamic simulators. So let's start with some unsteady aerodynamic phenomena that we observed in airborne wind energy. With our experimental setup, basically we were able to get some measurements of the state of the kite, the state of the tether, and also the aerodynamic variables such as the angle of attack, the side slip angle, and the aerodynamic velocity. So we feed all these measurements to an extended Kalman filter to be fused, and then we can get, for example, the kite trajectory. We selected here a nice figure of 8, where we also put the absolute velocity of the kite, and we see that the absolute velocity of the kite is maximum during the straight legs of the trajectory, where the kite is basically falling, and it's minimum during the turns of the kite, because we are against gravity here, and we are also turning. So the kite in the end breaks with respect to the ground. And we can also get the kite kinematics with respect to the wind frame, no? So for example, the angle of attack. And we observed periodic changes in the angle of attack, and they were not negligible at all because they vary between 20 degrees and 40 degrees, which is a lot. And then we plotted, basically, we also got the aerodynamic coefficients. In this case, we are plotting the longitudinal coefficients, the lift, drag, and pitch moment, with respect to the angle of attack. And we observed, during this figure of 8, 2 hysteresis cycles, clearly identified here. So this was one of the first observations. And basically, we associated this to a dynamic stall phenomenon occurring during this figure of 8 trajectories. And then we did a small experiment that was simple, but was very revealing, we think. So basically, we put some tufts here on the extra dos of the kite, and we also put a GoPro camera at the trailing edge. And then we flew the kite. So basically, while the kite was in the equilibrium point, everything was kind of separated. And at some point, we started flying figures of 8. You see now that the flow is separated, and then the flow attached. And during the turnings, the flow detached again, separated. And this was observed kind of robustly during the whole experiment. So this gives like more evidence, no, of dynamic stall. So this was revealing for us, because not only we found the hysteresis in the coefficients, but also observation of the flow. So as I told you, the flow was attached during the straight legs and separated during the turning legs. And at the end of the flight, we also noticed that the wind speed slowed down a lot, so it was reduced, and then the absolute velocity of the kite was much smaller, and it was fully separated all the time. So the kinematics, in the end, the key message is the kinematics of the kite during the figure of 8 is very important for this separation and for this dynamic stall phenomenon. And now I'm going to present you the 3 aerodynamic tools that I have developed during my thesis. So the first one, well, I have used or developed or adapted to kites. So the first one is a potential flow tool, which has a level of fidelity between low and medium, and a computational cost low-medium. Then we have runs, so Reynolds average Navier-Stokes, which is supposed to be like the highest fidelity for this Reynolds number that we usually have in this application. And we use an open source tool called SU2. And then we have something in the middle, which is a semi-empirical dynamic stall model that basically uses both of them. No? It has a computational side, which is UNPAM, but it also fed by high fidelity data from runs. This high fidelity data can also be experimental data, so we can play around. So basically, the first one is a potential flow tool, which is in-house, developed by Professor Cavallaro, and it uses a vortex lattice method approximation, so it's a panel method, okay, and it's unsteady. So that's why it's not super low fidelity, but something in between, no? And here I'm showing you the mesh, just to keep in mind the number of elements that we have, 2K elements, to compare it with the run simulation that you will see. And here there are some key publications of this tool. So regarding runs, we used SU2, which is open source. And then, so just to mention a little bit about the methods, I'm not going to get into detail of the equations, okay? And I don't want to get you bored. So we use runs with the K omega SST turbulence model. We use an incompressible solver because the Mach numbers here are super small. And we use a central Lax-Fredrik convective scheme, okay? And for the unsteady simulations, we use a dual time stepping procedure where we have like an inner loop solving a pseudo-steady problem, and then we have an outer loop for the physical time steps. So for every physical time step, we do a pseudo iteration before passing to the next step, to the next time step. So regarding the mesh and the boundary conditions, we have the kite here with a no-slip boundary condition, half of the kite actually, the delta kite. This is the refinement region over here. And then we impose the far field boundary condition over here to impose the flow, the free stream flow, and the symmetry boundary condition in the symmetry plane of the kite. And look at the number of cells. So it's 3 orders of magnitude bigger. So as you can imagine, the computational time, even though it's super well parallelized, it's much bigger. So we also use, to impose the kinematics, this pitching motion of the kite, we use a framework developed by Fonsi et al. In 2022 that basically takes an structural mesh with some given structural nodes. We prescribe the motion, it's a rigid motion. We interpolate this structural motion into our fluid mesh. We deform the mesh, the volumetric mesh, around the kite, and then we solve with this new configuration the fluid equation. And we get the aerodynamic coefficients. And the last tool is basically the semi-empirical dynamic stall model. So we start with the kinematics. We input these kinematics into UNPAM. We get the potential flow coefficients. And then everything together, coefficients and kinematics, go to these phenomenological dynamic stall blocks, which is a set of ordinary differential equations that model the physics of dynamic stall. So basically, they make changes to these coefficients in order to output the dynamic stall coefficients. And how do they do that?
You have already consumed your 10 minutes, so speed up.
Thank you. So how do we do that? By feeding this model with high fidelity data. So that's why it is said that it has an empirical part, which can be experimental or high fidelity CFD data, and it has the numerical part here. So in the end, we are getting the gist of the physics of dynamic stall, but the computational time is still very low. So very quickly, the results. So this is a run simulation of the kite. So I'm plotting here, again, the longitudinal coefficients. And we see that when we reach the maximum pitch angle, this leading edge vortex here explodes, and we have separation. So we have this kind of hysteresis. So we are, in the end, reproducing the same hysteresis, although for the moment qualitatively, because there are other phenomena such as aeroelastic phenomena involved. And if we compare the three tools, we get these results very quickly. So the U runs in blue, the potential flow, so UNPAM here in red, very far off, and then the dynamic stall tool, which matches quite well the high fidelity data, the runs data. Even for the pitch moment coefficient, at least it's qualitatively well captured. And then finally, some research achievements. So basically, we managed to publish 3 papers, and one of them is in progress with the results I just presented to you. I went to 3 conferences on wind energy, and another one on aeroelasticity as a side activity. And I also participated in the Fly Your Thesis program, doing a parabolic flight campaign to test the attitude control of a satellite. So that would be all. Thank you very much. I'm sorry for the time.